Good evening.
Good evening.
I would like to, late afternoon. I would like to call to order our budget workshop. Is this the second one? Public hearing? Um, the first public hearing, all right. It is September the 12th. It's 5:01. Call the roll, please.
Mayor James.
Here.
Vice Mayor Harris.
Here.
Commissioner Brandemart.
Here.
Commissioner Grace.
Here.
Commissioner Salvino.
Here.
City Manager Baldwin.
Here.
City Attorney Ansborough.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, I'll turn it over to City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, this is your first of two state-mandated public hearings to set the annual operating budget for fiscal year 2018-2019, beginning October 1st. In March, you directed staff to build next year's budget around no tax increase, 5.9998 mils. On July 24th, you received the city manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2018-2019 and set the tentative millage with no tax increase at 5.9998 mils. Last Friday, September 7th, 2018, you met to make changes to the recommended budget. And tonight, Finance will present the changes that you made, and you will set the not-to-exceed millage for next year. That millage can be lowered at your second public hearing, but cannot be raised when you set the final millage. Your second public hearing is at 5:01 p.m. on September 18th. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Satterfield, our Finance Director.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners,
Good evening.
City staff, and residents. We're here, as the City Manager stated, for our first public hearing for September 12th, 2018. We're going to give a brief presentation in regards to the City Manager's recommended budget. As he stated, we did meet on Friday at a budget workshop where we did receive the consensus of the Commission on a few items, which are going to be brought to you tonight as a budget amendment to his recommended budget. So you will vote at the very end of this to actually adopt the budget as amended. As we've mentioned at our previous meetings, the city is in a state of continued growth. This year we had a growth increase of 7.12%, doesn't seem loud enough, which is going to generate $23,517,978 in tax ad valorem revenue. It's about a $1.4 million increase over last year. I do want to keep reminding everyone that we do have a homestead exemption question that's going to be on the ballot in November. It's anticipated that that will probably pass. When it does pass, it is going to have an impact on the city revenues next year. It will go into effect January 1 of approximately $450,000 to $500,000 in revenue. So if we were to, for example, gain the same revenue as we did this last year of $1.4 million, it would further be reduced by almost $500,000. So depending on where our increases are next year, that'll kind of set us up for where we're going. The budget actions you're going to take tonight, you will be passing the tentative millage rate of 5.9998 mils and a voter-approved debt millage of 0.1760. You will be setting your second September public hearing, which is September 18th at 5:01 p.m. at City Hall. And you will be passing your final assessment resolutions for fire, rescue, stormwater, and residential solid waste. There is no recommended increase in the fire stormwater rates, but we are recommending a $9.96 a year increase for solid waste, which is in conjunction with our contract with Waste Management. And then your final motion will be to adopt the actual tentative budget as amended based on the recommendations we received from the Commission on Friday's workshop. The city's tax base, this is basically giving you some basic information. We're about 50% residential. We're 8% hotels, 23% commercial, 16% industrial, and the composition is 1.6% other. Our market values, as you can see, have increased over the last 5 years as the economy has been improving. Market values are up 9.2% from last year, and our assessed values are 6.6% increase from last year. The budget, as we've talked about before, continues to focus on sustainability, its infrastructure, and its appearances. In particular, we are funding an OASIS project again this year, which is something that after Friday's meeting, everybody was in agreement that we should probably continue to do those as for the appearances of the city, and it also helps, spur the neighborhoods and further development. There is public safety focus as well in here. There are additional public safety personnel. We're still working to establish the BSO contract with Fire Rescue and expanding our neighborhood street lighting programs and continuing to fund our legacy pension plans. Our pension plans, we have a combined total of $9.1 million in annual required contributions at this point. $780,000 of it is in the police pension plan. $5.46 million is in the fire portion of that plan. $1.79 million to the general pension plan, and $801,000 into the Florida retirement system. Both of the legacy plans were closed in 2005 for the general employees, in 2011 for the police and fire pension plan when we went to contract with BSO for our services. So all of our employees now are going into the FRS plan. We have 86% of those people currently of all employees are in that pension plan. So you will start seeing increases in that obligation, but that's due to the fact that all the employees are now going into that plan. We have budgeted $275,000 for our OPEB healthcare liability as part of our pension plans, and also in conjunction with FRS. There is a portion of a liability that we are required to fund to provide retiree healthcare insurance when people retire. That funding liability is currently $14.3 million. We were typically funding this at about $400,000 to $500,000 a year back in the early 2008, 2009, until we had the economic downturn. Because we invested in the Florida Municipal Investment Trust Fund, which garnered great earnings, we were able to eliminate those contributions temporarily. But as you can see, our liability is now going up instead of down. So what we want to do is start bringing that back on a phased-in basis over the next couple of years as we see the tax revenue coming in.
I have a question. So with your recommendation, especially with the OPEB, next year would it continue to be $275,000, or do you think you would increase the
depending on
contribution?
funding, we'd like to at least establish this as the base, depending on how revenues come in. The other things that are going to be competing interests between the city manager's recommended budget and what the commission is seeking. We would like to increase it, but that's something I think we have to take baby steps towards until we see what else is on the docket and see what the homestead exemption is going to do to us, and that sort of thing.
Okay.
I've already spoke about this. It's a $9.1 million that is currently being funded as a dollar amount or percentage of pay for all pension liabilities citywide. What's included in the budget right now for the city manager's recommended budget is no increase in property tax rate. We are using $200,000 of the undesignated reserve fund balance for the purchase of a grapple truck. The police services contract costs, which are $13.9 million, and the fire rescue, which is $12.3 million. This does include one additional school resource deputy officer at $158,000, and the 2 new fire safety officers, which was approved by the city commission during mid-year. The initial budget proposed does include the new fire chief for next year. However, after Friday's meeting, we discussed that this position was going to be temporarily eliminated, and we would revisit it at mid-year. You'll be voting on that budget amendment later on after this is done. However, there seemed to be kind of a, even though there was a consensus, kind of a split decision as to whether or not we wanted to actually fund it or not, and to consider at mid-year. So given that, we went back and took a look at potential sources of revenue at mid-year. And I think we have a good plan to partially fund this for at least 4 months of the year, starting around June. If the commission may or may not be aware, everyone here, but in 2007, when the pari-mutuel agreement came through on the Dania Highline, the city commission at that time set up a reserve account that was to be established for the impacts of that may be resulting from the expansion and the gaming at the Highlight.
1 million?
Well, no. What it is the commission set up that all the revenue that we receive would be put into a designated account, and it was not to be touched for at least 5 years from the date that we first received the revenue. So what we did, what I did is I took a look at that. We currently used some of that revenue last year, about $350,000, to fund the police officers that we hired last year, 2 of them. What we do have available to us effective in May, when that actually expires, is going to be about $140,000. So what I'm recommending at this point, we can't really take action on it tonight, but just so you know what the plan is that in May of next year, when this actual resolution expires, it will free up that money for you to be able to use for any purpose. So what we'd like to do is potentially use that to fund the fire chief from June till September.
Okay.
And then we would incorporate the balance of that, so we can at least do a partial year funding.
Okay.
So we could fund 4 months of it, and then for the following year, we could fund the full thing. So that's something that we'll bring to you as a separate item, because we can't really vote on it because the resolution hasn't really expired yet. Also included in here, as I stated, was the OASIS project. Your commission and contingency was at $108,000, but due to the budget amendments that were recommended on Friday, that actually has dropped down to $83,000. So I'll show you where that's coming from. Aids to private organizations are $35,000. The Chris Hickson Foundation Scholarship is at $5,000, and we've increased the chamber funding from $35,000 to $40,000.
Nikki,
Yes.
at the last meeting that we had, it was the consensus of this commission that the last thing under the city managers commission was the 3 that I asked for the commission. It's not there. Why?
That's going to be coming as a budget amendment at the end. You'll see that.
Oh, okay.
Yes. This is the recommended city manager's initial recommended budget. We can't really,
Okay,
the
okay.
amendments come later because that's an action that you have to take as a commission. Currently included are the 2 transport vans, the 3 F-150s in recreation, the Wave Runner, the $25,000 each for each seniors program, $15,000 for the MLK, the athletic funds program at $100,000, and the community bus West Route, which is $100,000 as well.
One question more. The 25,000 that we asked for.
That's
transportation, that's an
all of that's going
amendment?
to come at the end.
Okay, I'm jumping ahead.
Yep.
Sorry.
We do have in here a new solar lighting maintenance program for $70,000. Public Services Street Division, we have budgeted our roadway repaving at $325, alleyway repaving at $70. The sidewalk citywide and 50/50 program is $115,000, and miscellaneous asphalt and bridge repairs also at $115,000. The City Commission approved $56,000 annual contract at mid-year for the bus shelter and bus bench maintenance program. And we are looking to do a solar lighting project as well for CDBG. The Public Services Fleet Division is still in the efforts of trying to replace its aging fleet throughout the city. So there is a request for 2 F-250s in the Street Division, as well as the grapple truck, which we spoke about, we're going to fund from reserves, and 3 F-250s in the Parks and Grounds Division. The positions that were funded, it was discussed at Friday's meeting, is that we do have 3 part-time positions in recreation, but the commission had asked us to keep the funding and to not really allocate those to any specific position at this point in time, and add an additional $50,000 as well, which you'll see as your budget amendment at the end of the slide. Public Services, in their particular division, we have a project associate engineer, a regulatory compliance officer, a treatment plant operator B, a utility mechanic in the sewer division, utility maintenance worker in the stormwater division, and a reclassification of a current maintenance worker 1 to a facility maintenance technician, which is actually reflected of the job duties that individual is already performing. Community development, we discussed the permanent office supervisor, which it was requested that we not fund a supervisor position. You'll see that adjustment as well at the end of the slide. And then we are funding the administrative specialist position. There were 2 position title reclassifications. One was the code compliance manager to the code compliance and parking manager, and the lead code compliance inspector to the lead code compliance and parking supervisor. Those title changes are being requested to be reflected of the duties that they are supervising and overseeing the parking division and have been for several years. What's not included, these are some of the items that have been discussed over, several years actually, and we just kind of want to keep them on everybody's radar. We had talked about relocation of BSO potentially to City Hall. The metal detector and the guard, which the consensus at Friday's meeting was we were not going to fund that, so you will not see a budget amendment for that tonight. The BSO radio program, which we now know is going to be phased in over a 3-year period. The rec master plan improvements, the comp and class implementation, new EOC building, City Hall renovations, and potential funding at the 803 building for full-time staffing. All of that is kind of an unknown cost and not something that can be incorporated into this budget. Some of those items, as they come to fruition, once we get the rec master plan and the comp and class back, will be brought back to the commission as a separate item, and we can talk about how we would fund that going forward once a decision is made on those plans. There was a request for a marine safety officer, a sergeant, and a deputy, which are not currently funded, and IT Parker office renovations, as well as some unknown costs to do with the traffic calming and the beach and pier lighting. However, we do have a project in place down at the pier, which you'll see when we get to the pier fund, which may address some of those concerns as well. The unfunded positions were the code compliance officer and community development, the chief fire safety officer we talked about, as well as an assistant community development director position. Parks and ground technician and public services, the beach manager was unfunded, the admin assistant in public services, a utility mechanic in the sewer, and a treatment plant operator in the water division. As far as your enterprise funds, we are recommending no change in rates in the water, sewer, or stormwater fund. There are 3 new projects that are currently going to be, or I shouldn't say projects, capital items that are going to be in this budget for the water fund. The normal water distribution improvements, which are basically the as-needed funding for sewer repairs and minor replacements throughout the year, is $160,000. They are going to be purchasing a John Deere backhoe, which is going to be a shared cost between the water, sewer, and stormwater fund of $33,000. And the city commission did approve at mid-year to have a security officer at the water plant operations during the evenings. So that is a cost of $101,000 to this year's budget. And we also want to just keep in mind and keep on our radar the potential costs we're going to have in the next 4 years or so related to the water resource issues we're having in the C51 reservoir.
I have a question. When we ask for security and the metal detector here, it was $43,000, correct?
It was $43,000.
Why
yes.
is that for one security guard at public service?
That's for a
services
security guard
$101,000?
from 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. in the morning, which is something they've not ever had. So it's for the full year.
Okay.
And for the security guard at City Hall, you're only talking typically Monday through Friday from 8 to 5.
Okay.
It runs about $50,000 a year for the services. On the sewer system, right now the improvements for this year that were budgeted were $120,000 for the replacements of pumps 3 and 4, $305,000 for sewer distribution improvements citywide, and the 1/3 cost of the John Deere backhoe. Stormwater, again, no rate change. There's going to be $120,000 budgeted for small drainage improvements and the cost for the backhoe, primarily because we do have a couple of projects already underway that we're still waiting to complete. If those get completed throughout the year, then and we want to do new projects, then we can come to the commission during the year and request additional funding if we need to. The parking fund currently is going to be providing another $200,000 towards the beach redevelopment phase 2 project, as we've been doing annually since its inception. They are requesting a small SUV for $28,000, which is to replace a vehicle that's a 1998 current vehicle. And then the commission also voted to expand the parking, the security hours here at City Hall after hours to include 24/7. So in the evening. So that is a $77,000 impact that was approved at mid-year. With regards to the pier, the beach restaurant and the pier is in need of some rehabilitation. There was a request for $275,000 for a construction maintenance project down there for next year. We were able to fund that because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving the revenues that are currently coming in off the pier restaurant to quarterdeck to the pier fund. It had been used previously, kind of split between the general fund, but that really should go to the pier fund in its entirety. So we're moving those funds, and that should build up the necessary reserves that they're going to need for ongoing repair and maintenance down there on a continual basis. Phase 2 is currently funded at $1.17 million, but we do have some outstanding projects already in the works, which are going out to RFP, which is for the electrical relocations and also the lifeguard bathroom renovations for that building and the outdoor showers. The marina itself is doing very well. It's seeing steady demand. It's actually self-supporting operation. The slip rental fees are going to be increased about $25 a month, and that's to stay in compliance with the market conditions, which is a provision that we need to do as far as our debt and grant covenants. Okay, here's the amendments that we spoke about on Friday. The first one you're not aware of, but you passed last night well, you might be aware of it. It was in the resolution. Last night you passed the Beach Raker contract. That contract was about $6,600 short of what was budgeted in the proposed budget. So we're just asking that we fund that $6,600 in the recreation budget so they can go ahead and issue that purchase order after October 1. And that's going to be coming from contingency. The second amendment was discussed at both the CRA board meeting and Friday at the commission workshop. We need an additional $220,000 as a contribution to the CRA for their budget for this year, which is primarily due to capital projects that have to do with the West Dania Beach Boulevard as well as their housing projects. The amendment for the fire chief, this amendment is to remove the fire chief position at this point in time. And then as I discussed earlier, we'll be bringing back something in May when that resolution expires and frees up the funding that you'll need, that we should be able to fund it for at least 4 months next year. There was a request on Friday that we go ahead and add two additional full-time Parks and Grounds technicians for the field maintenance. Those 2 positions will be reporting to Public Services. The impact of that is $142,735 estimated. And the other side of that entry is just basically the breakdown of how we have to account for it accounting-wise. In addition to that, there was an amendment to increase the salaries for the City Commission by $3,000 each annually. That's a $23,838 impact. So that is now included in the amendments. Amendment number 6 was to add an additional $50,000 to the recreation budget in order to allow the new director to have ample time to look at his staffing needs out there in conjunction with his program. So that $50,000 in addition to the funding, I think it was around $87,000 for the other 2 part-time positions, will be allocated to recreation. And then once he has decided what that staffing level should look like, because they will be new positions, they will come back to the commission for final approval with with an outline of what he's looking to do. There was a request. We're going to add the additional $25,000 to the contractual services in the recreation division. That's to account for the charter bus services that we're anticipating that we're going to need for next year. That $25,000 is above and beyond and outside of the amounts that are being funded for both senior organizations and the MLK. And then the final amendment is the amendment for the permit supervisor to eliminate the permit supervisor position. That money is going to be going back into their contingency. And then once the community development director has had time to take a look again, it was instructed on Friday that he was allowed to take a look at positions and come back with a plan to the commission to fund whatever necessary positions he thought he would need out of the building fund. So this money is going to go into the building fund contingency. Once the director has determined what those staffing needs can be met out of the building fund, that will come back to the commission because there will be additional positions to the budget for approval.
Could you go back?
Yep.
Because if I don't see something on there that we discussed,
Okay.
with number 8. I know we discussed that he can bring back whatever non-supervisor position, but we also asked about a position that he said he needed. It was an inspector or something like that position that he asked for. I don't see that.
It's not on here at this point in time because he's going to go back and reevaluate and take a look at that position as well as the administrative
Okay.
assistants. and-
Okay.
So he doesn't
and
need it
special-
now?
That's
on it.
why I'm,
At this point in time, I believe that's currently being contracted. Yeah.
so it's being outsourced right now?
Right now, it's being outsourced. He does want to look at the opportunity to bring that in-house, but he's going to come back with a.
No, I'm talking about a position that wasn't filled from someone that, we had a position there and then they retired and then we never filled that position.
Correct.
So they didn't fill it with
They
some-
filled it with contract.
Oh, they outsourced the.
They
okay.
outsourced some of those duties.
Gotcha.
I can't answer that.
In 2 years. So you don't need any positions. Okay.
But keep in mind that as far as the contract with Broward County for inspection services and things like that's, we decide what type of positions we want. So that's something that, he can take a look at if he wants to bring that in-house. It's not something that we have to
Oh, so
necessarily
it doesn't have to
do
wait
as-
for 2 years. Okay, got it.
The actions you're going to take tonight, again, are you're going to adopt your tentative millage rate and your debt millage. You're going to set your second September meeting, which is going to be September 18th at 5:01, and pass your final assessment rates of fire, stormwater, and residential, and then adopt the tentative budget as amended. That's all I have.
All right, Commissioner Grace, your light was on. Do you want
No,
to, you already asked the question?
yes.
Okay. Any discussion or Vice Mayor?
This is to Tom and to Nikki. I know the lease on the Dania Beach Bar and Grill, I believe it's up in January.
Mid-February.
February, and it is quite old. 1999, 1947. It seems like, how do we factor in the potential revenue source for a new tenant there?
Well,
Boy.
actually, for this budget year, we are going to, obviously, we took the conservative approach. We know that the lease is going to be up in February, so we only budgeted revenue through February. There's been discussion on what we might do with that property, so until we know that from a budget perspective, we're always going to budget the conservative side. We're not going to budget anything past February until we know what we're doing with the property.
I think the property appraiser's value on that property was, I think, $537,000, just at market value. So I've been getting a lot of inquiries from restaurateurs that would like to energize the beach, and then that money would go into the pier fund. Would it?
No, actually, the revenue from the restaurant goes into the general fund because it's the beach, not
Oh,
the
you
pier. Yeah.
reported it, okay.
That's where it's currently
Okay,
going now.
All right, thanks.
Okay, do we have a motion, discussion? Motion? This is a
Yeah,
public
it's a
hearing.
vote.
Anyone to speak for or against this?
Excuse me, it should be Tuesday, 9/18.
I'm sorry. You're right.
Just wanted to point it out.
Tuesday, the 18th.
Commissioner Salvino?
Just a question, are we adopting this all at one time? If there's a
No, there's a resolution for each one, and Tom will start off because he has a script that he needs to read for the first resolution. You need to adopt your tentative millage rate first before you can actually
Okay.
legally adopt your budget.
All right, we're ready.
You have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt it.
Oh, nope.
You
He
read this-
he has
Make
to
it-
do he has
read it
to,
on-
it's a public hearing, so he has to read the titles
Okay.
first.
It's a little,
millage rate?
it's
Okay.
a little script we do. This announcement is for the adoption of the proposed millage rate for the city of Dania Beach, Florida for fiscal year 2018-2019. The operating municipal millage rate will be 5.9998 mils, which reflects no change from the city's current fiscal year millage rate. This operating millage rate represents a 5.86% increase over the rollback rate of 5.6675 mils as computed in accordance with the provisions of section 200.0651 Florida statutes. The voter-approved debt service millage rate is 0.1760 mils in accordance with the provisions of law pursuant to Chapter 200 Florida statutes. The city's aggregate millage rate is 6.1758 mils, which is comprised of 5.998 mils for operating and 0.1760 mils for debt service. The final hearing for the ad valorem tax will be held at Dania Beach City Hall, 100 West Dania Beach Boulevard, Dania Beach, Florida, September 18th, 2018, which is a Tuesday, right, at 5:01 p.m.
This is
First resolution is a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, Florida, as required by the city charter and section 200.065 Florida statutes, approving the proposed millage rate necessary to be levied for the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 for operating purposes, establishing the debt millage approved by the electorate, providing for a public hearing when and where objections may be heard and questions concerning the same will be answered, providing for conflicts, providing for an effective date.
This is a public hearing. Anyone to speak for or against this? Do we have a motion?
Make a motion to approve.
All in favor? Anyone opposed?
Item 2, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, Florida, relating to the imposition of fire rescue assessments and provision of fire protection services, facilities, and programs in the City of Dania Beach, Florida, reimposing fire rescue assessments with updated assessment rates against assessed property located within the City of Dania Beach for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018, approving the rates of assessment, approving the final assessment roll, confirming and supplementing the preliminary rate resolution, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date.
This is a public hearing. Anyone to speak for or against this?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Next, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, Florida, relating to the provision of stormwater management services in the City of Dania Beach, Florida, imposing and reimposing stormwater assessments against property located within the City of Dania Beach for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018, approving the rate of assessment, approving the assessment roll, providing for conflicts, further providing for an effective date.
This is a public hearing. Anyone to speak for or against this?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Next, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, Florida, relating to the provision of solid waste service assessments in the City of Dania Beach, Florida, reimposing solid waste service assessments against assessed property located within the boundaries of the City of Dania Beach for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2018, approving the rate of assessment, approving the assessment roll, providing for conflicts, further providing for an effective date.
This is a public hearing. Anyone to speak for or against this?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
And lastly, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Dania Beach, Florida, as required by the city charter and section 200.065 Florida statutes, approving a tentative annual budget for the city for the fiscal year 2018 to 2019, providing for a public hearing when objections will be heard and questions concerning the budget will be answered, providing for conflicts, further providing for an effective date.
This is a public hearing. Anyone to speak for or against this?
Second.
Question.
Commissioner Salvino?
If you're done with this, is this going to be adjourned, or we have anything to say about what's up there?
No, this would be the time to bring it up. So we're, and the motion would be to approve it as amended.
As amended, okay. I just want to object to the amended number 5 on the commission raises. So just put it on record. I don't know if it needs to be voted on or not, Tom.
As long as your objection is noted, I think that's fine.
Okay.
I believe that the actual, we're right now voting on the budget, but the actual raises, I do believe, have to come back in the form of a resolution to the commission as a whole.
Okay.
We have a motion in a second.
All in favor?
Do we have a motion in a second, Tom?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. That's it? Oh,
Mayor, one more thing before you adjourn.
Go ahead.
I cannot make the next budget meeting. I have a dilemma, and I'll be out of town. If it goes the way it did tonight, I would give my approval on the budget. If you need to make a phone call, I'm asking to be excused at that point.
Okay.
What's that date?
Do you need,
You don't have to have 5. It's preferable, of course, but it's not required, as long as you're confident that.
I can call it in I can.
If you call in, it would have to be a way you can hear us and you can,
Okay.
that could be done.
I have to be out of town.
I'm sure we
It's
have
not
some technology.
Mayor,
No,
it's not mandatory.
As long as you have a quorum, but if he wants to participate, you can certainly be given that.
Can I like write a notarized statement?
No, it'd have to be, it'd have to be live.
Okay.
So
Or
if
if you
you-
decide to.
if you want us to do that, we'll do it,
Do what?
Okay.
to have him call in and he has to be able to hear from people back, that you can have, so you can have a dialogue. So it has to be a speakerphone.
Okay.
It's not.
Other than the presentation, the meeting, I mean, unless there's any major changes, will be fairly short. You're only going to be acting on 2 items at the next, which is going to be the final millage rate and the actual budget as amended.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
move to approve him from the next meeting. Anybody have any objections?
Second.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.
That's what I'm talking about.
So do the employees. So do the employees.